The conference room buzzed with the same stale energy as always. Mark shifted in his chair, trying not to let his mind wander to the pile of laundry waiting for him at home. Another slide flickered on the screen, graphs, projections, the kind of stuff that made his eyelids heavy. As the speaker droned on, his gaze drifted across the room, and that's when he saw her. Sarah. He didn't even know her name yet, but there was something about her. She was laughing, not at the presentation, but at something someone had whispered in her ear. Her eyes sparkled, brighter than the fluorescent lights. It had been years since he'd felt a jolt like that, a flicker of something exciting. He knew he shouldn't be staring, but he couldn't seem to look away. Later, at the hotel bar, he found himself inexplicably drawn to her. Okay, maybe not so inexplicable. She was beautiful, clearly smart from those few interactions he'd overheard, and there was an ease about her. "Can I buy you a drink?" he asked before his brain could catch up with his mouth. She smiled, a slow, amused smile he felt right down to his toes. "Sure. But only if you promise not to talk about sales projections." They talked, a lot, about everything it seemed, from frustrating clients to childhood dreams they'd tucked away long ago. With Sarah, he didn't feel like tired, old Mark, the one who made dad jokes and fixed leaky faucets. He didn't even notice Susan's usual evening check-in text. He was having the kind of conversation that felt electric. The kind he and Susan hadn't had in years. The night stretched out way past what felt reasonable for a work conference. Their drinks were replaced, their laughter probably a little too loud. At one point, while walking her back to her hotel room, it hit him. This was dumb. Susan would kill him. Sarah was trouble. But then there was her smile at the door, and a "good night, Mark." That sounded a lot more like an invitation than a farewell. The image of Susan, back at home asleep, probably in her worn-out college t-shirt, snapped into focus. God, he felt like crap. It was one night, one stupid night. Just a bit of harmless fun. He'd forget about Sarah in the morning. Mark did his best to convince himself as he drifted off to sleep. Mark had always prided himself on being a predictable guy. Order the same burger, wear the same gray socks every Tuesday, that was him. Routines made him feel safe, in control. But that night, with Sarah across the table, the familiar buzz of red wine in his veins, something in him shifted. They moved from the restaurant to a little wine bar tucked away on a side street. He usually hated places like that, too crowded, too loud. But with Sarah, it was different. She ordered a bottle of something he couldn't pronounce, and he laughed, a real laugh. Not the polite chuckle he used with clients. "Tell me something." She leaned in, her voice low. "If you could do anything, change anything about your life right now, what would it be?" He should have told her about the kids, their college funds, his stupid but steady job. But those words felt heavy in his mouth. Instead, he thought about the half-finished basement project, his old band t-shirt shoved in a drawer, that fishing trip with his dad he'd kept putting off. "I don't know," he said finally, and damn if it didn't sound desperate, even to his own ears. The night blurred after that. More wine, a taxi ride, the feel of her keycard against his palm in the hotel hallway. It was so wrong, he knew that with a bone-deep certainty. Yet, the moment that door swung open, the wave of regret was washed away by something hotter, bolder. He'd forgotten what it felt like to be reckless. Waking up beside Sarah in those crisp white hotel sheets was like being dunked in ice water. The shame rushed in, a full-body shiver that made him nauseous. Mark fumbled for his clothes, mumbled something about an early meeting, and fled the room. On the cab ride back to the conference center, he stared out the window and repeated the same phrase over and over in his head. One time. One stupid, stupid time. He could fix this. He and Susan, they'd weathered tough times before. This would just be a blip, a mistake he'd never make again. I found myself checking my phone more than usual. Not to call Mark, I couldn't bring myself to do that, but just in case. It was stupid. Every buzz, every chime sent a jolt of panic through me. What if it was him, fumbling for an excuse about a late meeting? Worse, what if it was her? The worst one came a couple of days later. Just 3 words. Last night was. My thumb hovered over the delete button. I didn't even need to see the rest. No name, no picture, but I knew. That sinking feeling in my stomach, it was the same one from when I was a kid, caught with a hand in the cookie jar. Mark was jumpy too. At first, I figured it was work stress, some big project going off the rails. But then came the flowers, a vase of wilted roses from the grocery store that he tried to pass off as some special occasion. He started taking the kids out for ice cream on random weeknights, asking me all these questions about my day. Questions he usually couldn't be bothered to remember the answers to. It was pathetic, watching him try so hard. Like if he just played the perfect husband, the guilt would disappear. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to shake him and make him confess. But another, colder part of me, just sat back and watched the show. There were moments I thought about texting her, telling her to back off, threatening her, something. But that felt desperate. And what would I even say? Hi, it's Mark's boring old wife, please leave my leftovers alone? Pathetic. Instead, I started paying attention. Late nights on his laptop after I'd gone to bed, hushed phone calls when he thought I was in the shower. He was slipping up, getting sloppy. And with each little slip, that anger inside me grew. Not the hot, explosive kind. More like a low burn, a steady fire I was going to let simmer until I was ready. The day Mark's next work trip was announced, my stomach dropped. Same damn city, same hotel chain even, from what I could tell on that stupid corporate booking website. I told myself not to be paranoid, that he'd learned his lesson. Maybe he had, but I wasn't the type to trust that easily anymore. I started planning, not big plans, just little things. A new haircut, the kind that made me feel a bit sharper, bolder. A few late nights, working, at my friend Beth's house so there wouldn't be an empty bed waiting for Mark when he got back. It might sound petty, but each small action made me feel a bit less helpless, a bit more in control. Then came Sarah's email, landed in my inbox with an innocent subject line about some project they had collaborated on months ago. Just a quick follow-up question, totally work-related. But there it was, her name staring up at me, a little jolt of poison. At first, I ignored it, hit delete and went about my day. That night though, when Mark was snoring beside me, I found myself scrolling through my deleted folder. Her message was still there, a little digital landmine just waiting to go off. I told myself it was research. Just checking what she was up to, gauging the threat level. But as soon as I hit reply, I knew I was lying. The words flowed easily, a back and forth about reports and meetings, sprinkled with a little casual flirtation. Nothing major, nothing even Mark would notice if he stumbled across it. Yet, those few sent lines felt like throwing a match into a gasoline can. The next morning, I felt sick with guilt. And something else, a thrill. It had been so long since I felt anything close to excitement. Talking to Sarah, it was like a jolt of electricity after years of numbness. Was this what Mark felt with her? That buzz of possibility, of danger? The thought made my blood boil. Mark was gone again. Another project, another late-night flight. I'd packed his suitcase with practiced efficiency, the same shirts, the same toiletries, the same half-hearted kiss goodbye. A knot formed in my stomach as I watched him pull out of the driveway. It wasn't sadness anymore, more like a dull ache, the kind you get used to. The house felt too big, too empty with him gone. The kids had their own busy lives, school, friends, all the stuff that had filled the spaces Mark and I used to occupy. That first night, I poured myself a glass of wine, a big one, and turned on some mindless reality TV. But I couldn't focus on the manufactured drama. Instead, I found myself on Google Maps, staring at that damn hotel from his last trip. It was stupid, I knew. But as I scrolled through photos of the lobby, the generic bar, something shifted in me. It wasn't jealousy exactly, more a kind of cold determination. The lies were the worst part. Traffic was crazy, he'd say, pulling in well past midnight. Or, the client dinner ran late. He thought he was slick, but his excuses were getting weaker with each repetition. I stopped calling him out on it. Let him think he was getting away with it. It made it all the more satisfying when I'd find those little pieces of evidence. A receipt for a fancy restaurant stuffed in his coat pocket, a text from an unknown number just a little too late at night. I started keeping a notebook. Dates, times, inconsistencies in his stories. It felt a bit crazy, a bit obsessive. But each time I jotted something down, it was like taking back a tiny sliver of control. Sometimes I'd fantasize about confronting him, throwing the notebook at his feet, screaming, "Explain this." But I knew how that would end. Denials, excuses, maybe even a few tears on his part. And in the end, I'd still be stuck in this marriage, just more bitter, more resentful than before. No, I needed a better plan. One that would leave him scrambling, not me. Chicago this weekend, babe. Some big client thing, Mark mumbled from the bedroom, tossing wrinkled clothes into his suitcase. If he was a better liar, he'd at least try to sound apologetic. I tried to muster up some fake disappointment, something about missing him for a few days. But the words stuck in my throat. It was easier to just nod, offer a quick, have a good trip, and watch him go. He wasn't going to Chicago, I knew that much. This time, the lies didn't even bother me. It had become a kind of morbid game, one I was pretty sure I was winning. The minute he was out the door, I was on my laptop. First stop, those discount travel booking sites. Not the corporate ones he used for work, the cheaper ones for last-minute romantic getaways. I searched by dates, narrowed it down to the general region where I knew Sarah lived. Bingo. A cozy bed and breakfast, about 2 towns over from her place. The name of the reservation was a woman's, a name I didn't recognize. And it wasn't booked with his work email either, but a personal one I'd forgotten he even had. The proof was right there in black and white, a confirmation number and a little heart emoji next to the dates. I felt a surge of disgust and something else too. A strange kind of satisfaction. Our anniversary was a couple of weeks later. Mark, ever predictable, made reservations at the same overpriced Italian place we went to every year. He even bought me the usual pearl necklace, like he was checking off items on a to-do list, not celebrating a woman he supposedly loved. Sitting across from him, watching him raise a glass to us, was almost comical. The man barely knew me anymore. Maybe he never really did. It made the lies he'd been feeding me feel even more pathetic. I could barely touch my food, the guilt choking him, not me. I was playing a longer game, making plans he couldn't even fathom. It was only a matter of time until those plans came to fruition, and he'd be the one left blindsided. I picked the fight on a Wednesday. He was on his laptop, probably emailing Sarah or looking up romantic weekend spots. I slammed my coffee mug down on the kitchen counter, making him jump. "What's gotten into you lately?" I asked. No small talk, no gentle hinting. I was done with that. Mark did that thing he always does when he's caught off guard, the nervous half laugh, the scratching the back of his neck. Nothing. Why? Is something wrong? He was so bad at this, it was almost embarrassing. Don't play dumb, Mark. We both know what's going on. My voice came out sharper than I'd intended. He tried the tired excuses. Stressed at work, project deadlines, the usual crap. But I cut him off. Told him about the Chicago trip that wasn't to Chicago, the little B&B I'd found online. I didn't mention her name, kept it vague, but he knew. The color drained from his face. The fight was ugly. Yelling. Accusations. The kids huddled in their rooms pretending not to hear. At one point he blurted out, "At least she makes me feel alive." It was like being punched in the gut. Then, just as quickly as it started, it petered out. We just stared at each other, the space between us filled with a silence heavier than any words could be. Finally, he mumbled some pathetic apology, grabbed his jacket, and left. I heard the garage door rumble open, his car backing down the driveway. He knew where he'd be going. The next day came the pressure from her. An email popped up on his phone, left carelessly on the kitchen counter. Something about needing a decision, about not waiting around forever. My hands shook as I deleted it, trying to block out the images it had conjured in my mind. Mark came home late, smelling of cheap cologne and desperation. I'd already packed a few things for the kids and me. We stayed with my sister that night. My plan was starting to take shape, and for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of something like hope. It wasn't the sweet, innocent kind of hope from before. It was something sharper, something more determined. It was the kind of hope that would help me survive what came next. Mark tried to be discreet, sneaking around on his phone whenever I wasn't looking, deleting his browser history obsessively. But I wasn't an idiot. Late one night, I heard what sounded like muffled whispers coming from the guest bedroom. I pushed the door open and there he was, hunched over his laptop with a panicked expression on his face. "What are you doing?" I tried to keep my voice even, but a tremor ran through it. He slammed the laptop shut so quickly it almost fell off the bed. "Nothing. Just checking some work emails," he stammered. "At midnight?" My laugh was harsh, humorless. "Come on, Mark. Just how long do you think you can keep this up?" He tried to explain, mumbling something about a potential new apartment, a fresh start. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been so damn pathetic. He was grasping at straws, and I think he knew it. The worst one came a few nights later. The shrill ring of his phone pierced the silence of our bedroom, jolting me awake. Sarah flashed across the screen, a name I'd only whispered in my darkest moments. Mark fumbled for it, hitting the silence button in panic. "Who's Sarah?" I asked, sitting straight up in bed. My voice was cold as ice. He made up some story about a new coworker, a project they were collaborating on. It was the weakest lie I'd ever heard. But the fight was gone out of me. I just lay back down, my eyes fixed on the ceiling. The next morning, the words weren't necessary. We both knew the truth. It hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. When I looked at him, I no longer saw my husband. He was a stranger, a man who'd been lying to me for God knows how long. That day I started making calls. To a lawyer, to a realtor, to anyone who could help me unravel the life we'd built. It felt strange, moving these pieces around, planning for a future that didn't include him. Yet, with every call, every form filled out, a weight lifted off my shoulders. I was finally taking control of my own story. I stopped talking to Mark. Not in a dramatic, screaming way that would take more energy than I had left. But the casual conversations we used to have, about the kids' schedules or what to make for dinner, those were gone. He noticed, of course. He'd hover in doorways, open his mouth as if to speak, then close it again. The silence stretched out between us like a yawning chasm. And in that silence, I made my plans. It wasn't about dramatic gestures. No throwing his clothes out on the lawn or smashing his precious golf clubs. It was the small things. A few of my things disappearing into a suitcase, quiet phone calls with my mom, my eyes scanning apartment listings late at night after I thought he was asleep. One evening, he finally broke. He found me in the kitchen, my hands clenched around a mug of cold tea. His voice was hoarse, almost pleading, "Susan, please. We need to talk about this." And that's when I let it all out. Not just the affair, though God knows that was bad enough. But the years of neglect, of him taking me for granted, of me feeling so lonely in my own marriage. I told him how I used to wake up in the middle of the night and wish it were all just a bad dream. He tried to interrupt, to apologize. "I know I screwed up. I'll do anything, we can get counseling, anything." I cut him off with a raised hand. "It's too late, Mark. Way too late." The look on his face was something between shock and despair. He mumbled something about still loving me, about wanting to fix things. But his words held no weight. They were as hollow as the promises he'd broken so many times before. "Love?" I scoffed. "Do you even know what that word means anymore?" The silence descended again. I picked up my tea and turned away. As far as I was concerned, the conversation was over. There was nothing left to say. I had a future to build, one that no longer involved him. I found the apartment on a quiet street lined with old oak trees, just a short drive from the kids' school. It was small, barely more than a bedroom and a combined kitchen-living area. But it was mine. There was something so satisfying about signing that lease with my own name, no mark scrawled beside it. Moving day was a Tuesday. He was at work, the kids at classes, leaving me with the whole day and a rented moving van. I enlisted the help of my brother and a few close friends. We made it look like a whirlwind hit the house. Furniture disassembled, boxes overflowing. I left out some of Mark's clothes, his toiletries still on the bathroom counter, just to make it look less planned. When they'd all gone, I sat down on the bare living room floor for a moment. The house, once so filled with family chaos, now echoed with emptiness. A flicker of guilt pierced me. This had been our home, the place we'd built a life together. It was gone now. There was no going back. I walked to the kitchen counter and scrawled a short note. Explained in the most practical terms possible that I'd left, where I could be reached if necessary. His phone, keys, anything else of his importance, I left stacked neatly beside it. Then I slipped off my wedding ring, placed it on top of the pile, and walked out the door, locking it behind me. He must have felt the shift the minute he walked through the door that night. The missing furniture, the half-empty closets, my scent erased from the air. And then the note, the ring, the finality of it all. I pictured him sitting there alone in that cavernous house, the silence pressing in on him. It was cruel, maybe. But he'd earned it. He had years to listen, years to change. Instead, he'd chosen Sarah, or excitement, or whatever lie he told himself to justify his selfishness. Now it was his turn to face the consequences, his turn to live with the emptiness he had